The alien girl arrived quietly, her steps soft and unsure as the doors of the docking bay hissed open. The metal air of Erebus Prime, the great human-led space station, smelled of oil, electricity, and distant stars. For her it was strange, too sharp, too clean, but she smiled anyway. Her name was Rinla, and she came from the mist-covered world of Valaris, a planet where the air was always damp and filled with the scent of glowing flowers and ancient soil. She was small compared to most of the species that lived on the station, with fur that shimmered faintly silver blue under the light and long ears that twitched when someone spoke. She had been sent as part of a new exchange program between her kind, the Voltari and the humans. It was meant to bring peace and friendship after years of quiet distance between the two worlds. At first, everyone greeted her kindly enough. The officers smiled politely. The scientists asked her questions about her biology. The cooks even offered her human food, which she tried but found far too dry. But after a few days, things began to change. People started whispering. It began with a medic who walked past her in the corridor and suddenly stopped, pressing a hand over his mouth. Then an engineer refused to work in the same lab. Even the cleaning drones were reprogrammed to avoid her quarters. Rinla didn't understand what was happening. She checked her uniform, cleaned her fur, and even asked the AI if there was something wrong with her hygiene. There wasn't. Yet the fear around her kept growing, quiet but heavy, like a shadow following her wherever she went. The truth came out one evening when she overheard two crew members talking outside the mess hall. "It's her scent," one said nervously. "It does something to me. Makes me feel trapped." "Yeah," the other agreed. "It's like my instincts are screaming to run. She's dangerous, even if she doesn't mean to be." Rinla froze where she stood, her claws curling against her palms. Her scent? She'd never thought about it before. Among her people, scent was part of life. It carried emotion, warmth, even comfort. On Valaris, her scent would be considered soft and welcoming. But here, among aliens and humans, it seemed to bring only fear. She stopped eating in the common room after that. She skipped morning briefings. She even wore sealed layers to try to block her natural scent, though it only made her uncomfortable. Still, it wasn't enough. Whenever she entered a room, people found excuses to leave. The worst part wasn't the whispers, it was the silence. The way conversations would stop when she passed. The way no one met her eyes. She was alone among thousands of souls. At night, she sat by the small window of her quarters, staring out at the distant swirl of stars. Her world had been green and alive, full of music and laughter, but here everything felt cold. She had wanted to learn from humans, to see how they built, how they dreamed, but now she only wanted to go home. Still, she tried to endure. She told herself it wasn't their fault. Fear was instinct, and instincts were old things, older than reason. Yet deep down, a small ache grew inside her chest, a loneliness that smelled faintly like rain. One morning, she went to deliver a datapad to the engineering bay. She didn't know that this day would change everything. The doors hissed open and a wave of metallic warmth hit her nose, the smell of oil and circuits. Several humans were working there, talking and laughing, but as soon as she stepped inside, the laughter stopped. She held the pad to her chest and forced a smile. "Delivery from command," she said softly. The nearest worker, a tall man with sandy hair, took a step back. "Leave it there," he muttered quickly, pointing to a table without looking at her. Her ears drooped. She nodded silently and turned to go. But as she did, one voice spoke up from the back of the room. "Hey, wait," she turned. A man was standing there, his face smudged with grease and his eyes a calm, earthy brown. He wasn't covering his nose or stepping away like the others. He just looked curious. He walked closer, ignoring the nervous glances of his co-workers. The air carried her scent to him, soft, earthy, faintly sweet. His eyebrows lifted slightly, not in fear, but in recognition. "Huh," he murmured, tilting his head. "That smells familiar." The others looked shocked. "Eli, what are you doing?" One hissed, but he only smiled a little. "It smells like rain on soil. Like home." Rinla blinked, her heart catching for a moment. For the first time since she arrived, someone didn't turn away. And though she didn't know it yet, that simple sentence would change everything that followed. After that day in the engineering bay, something changed quietly but deeply. The human who had spoken to her, the one who didn't step away, was Eli Carter. He was not an officer, not a scientist, just a mechanic. He worked with old machines that hummed and groaned like tired beasts, Most people on the station saw him as simple but reliable. He fixed things no one else had patience for, and now, he seemed curious about the alien girl everyone avoided. When Rindala came back the next morning to return a misplaced wrench, she found Eli alone in the workshop, crouched beside a broken generator. The scent of hot metal filled the air. She hesitated at the door, unsure if she should disturb him, but before she could decide, he turned around and smiled. "You came back," he said easily, wiping grease off his hands. She nodded awkwardly. "I wanted to return this. You left it near the corridor." He took the wrench, his hand brushing hers for a second. His skin was warm. "Thanks. These things wander off more than I do." The corner of her mouth lifted into the faintest smile. It was the first time she had smiled in days. Eli studied her quietly for a moment, noticing how she stood half-turned away, as if ready to flee. Her silver-blue fur shimmered faintly under the workshop light, and her long tail was curled close to her legs, a clear sign of nervousness. "You know," he said softly, "you don't have to stand so far. I don't bite." Her ears twitched at the gentle humor. "Most others prefer distance." "Yeah," he said, shrugging. "They told me I should stay away too." Her eyes widened slightly. "Then why don't you?" Eli leaned back against the work table, thinking. "Because your scent doesn't scare me," he said honestly. "It reminds me of something familiar. My home on Earth had a small garden. Whenever it rained, the soil smelled just like this. My grandmother used to say it was the smell of life waking up." Rinla stared at him for a long moment, uncertain whether to believe him. No one had ever spoken about her scent that way before. For everyone else it was fear, instinct, panic. But for him it was memory, comfort. "I never meant to frighten anyone," she whispered. "It is natural to me. We emit scent to show emotion. It is how we communicate warmth, calmness, or care. But here, and it only brings fear." Eli nodded slowly. "Fear's an easy thing to learn. Harder to unlearn, but it's not your fault, Rinla." When he said her name, it came out soft, careful, like he wanted to get it right. That simple kindness made her chest ache. Over the next few days, Rinla began visiting the workshop more often. Sometimes she offered to help with repairs. Sometimes she just sat nearby, quietly watching him work. He didn't mind. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the company. He talked while he worked about music, about the taste of real rainwater, about old human cities that had fallen into the sea. And she listened wide-eyed, her ears flicking gently whenever he laughed. In return, she told him stories of her own world, of the glowing forest that sang at night, of the creatures that used colors to speak instead of words. Eli listened like a child hearing a bedtime story, completely lost in her voice. But not everyone on Erebus Prime liked what they saw. The whispers began again. The humans spending too much time with her. He's under her influence, it's that scent messing with his head. Someone needs to report this. One afternoon, Commander Revek, the avian officer, called Eli to his office. His feathers were sharp and gleaming, his tone cold. "Engineer Carter, I hear you've been in close contact with the Valerian representative." "That's unwise," Eli folded his arms. "Unwise to talk to someone who's done nothing wrong?" Revek's wings flicked in irritation. "You may not sense it, but her kind's pheromones affect alien physiology. We cannot risk panic aboard this station." "Keep your distance," Eli's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Commander, panic comes from ignorance, not scent." That small act of defiance spread through the ranks like fire. Some called him brave. Others called him foolish. But to Rinla, he was the first person who had seen her as more than a creature to be avoided. That evening she found him again in the quiet of the workshop. She hesitated in the doorway, her voice low. "They told you to stay away, didn't they?" He looked up from his tools and smiled. "They tell me a lot of things. Doesn't mean I listen." She stepped closer, her heart trembling with emotions she didn't yet understand. "Why? Why are you not afraid of me?" Eli looked at her for a long moment, then said simply, "Because fear doesn't make things better. Understanding does, and you remind me what home feels like." Rinla's eyes glistened faintly under the light. Her species didn't cry like humans, but if they did, she would have. For the first time since she left her misty world, she felt seen, not as a threat, not as an experiment, but as a person, and in the cold heart of a metal station drifting through space, that feeling was more precious than anything she had ever known. Rinla's life slowly began to change after she met Eli. For the first time since arriving on Erebus Prime, She had someone who didn't flinch when she walked by, someone who didn't hold their breath or step back. She began to visit the engineering bay almost every day now, sometimes to help, sometimes just to listen. She learned how to fix pipes, how to seal pressure valves, how to check the flow of coolant. Her claws were small but delicate, and Eli often said she had the perfect touch for delicate wires. Whenever she made a mistake, he never got angry. He would just smile and say, "That's how we learn." To her, his smile was like sunlight in a place that had forgotten what warmth felt like. Eli treated her as an equal, not as a guest or an experiment. He even gave her a small human nickname, Rin. At first, she didn't understand why humans shortened names, but when he explained that it was a sign of fondness, she kept the name close to her heart. But the more they worked together, the louder the whispers grew. In the mess hall, people spoke behind their hands. Some said Eli was being influenced by her scent. Others claimed he was too blind to see the danger. A few even accused Rinla of manipulating him. "The alien girl's scent changes emotions," someone said bitterly. "That's why he acts like that. He's too close. It's unnatural," another added. Rinla heard these things, but she never told Eli. She didn't want to burden him. She thought she could handle the quiet cruelty herself, but every word cut a little deeper. Still, Eli wasn't stupid. He saw the way people looked at them. He saw how officers turned silent when Rinla entered a room. One day, when he found her sitting alone by the viewport, her ears lowered and her eyes dim, he crouched down beside her. "You heard them, didn't you?" he asked softly. She didn't answer, but her tail curled tightly around her knees. "They say I've been affected," he continued. "That your sense got into my head." Rinla's voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am dangerous and I just can't see it." Eli shook his head firmly. "No, you're not dangerous. They're just afraid of what they don't understand. Fear makes people cruel." She looked at him, her silver eyes shimmering in the low light. "Why do you keep standing up for me, Eli? You could lose your place here." He leaned back against the metal wall, thinking, "Because someone should. You came here in peace. You don't deserve to be treated like a monster just because of how you smell. You remind me what humanity used to mean before fear took over everything." Her heart fluttered, heavy and warm all at once. She didn't know what to say. That night, when she returned to her quarters, she found a small note on her door. It wasn't signed, but she didn't need to guess who it was from. The handwriting was messy and uneven. "Don't let them change who you are. You smell like life, Rin, not fear." She held the paper close, her claws trembling slightly. No one had ever written her a message before, but the peace didn't last long. A few days later, Commander Revek summoned both of them to the command room. His feathers were puffed with anger, and several senior officers stood beside him. "Engineer Carter," Revek said sharply, "you have been repeatedly warned about your contact with the Valerian. This behavior is unacceptable." Eli crossed his arms, unfazed. "With respect, Commander, she's a crew member, not a biohazard." Revek's golden eyes narrowed. "Her presence is affecting morale. Multiple reports have been filed. I cannot allow this distraction to continue." Eli took a step forward. "Maybe morale's low because people are acting like cowards." The room went silent. The officers exchanged shocked glances. Revek's feathers bristled. "You are dangerously close to insubordination, human." "Then maybe," Eli said quietly, "it's time someone was." Rinla stood frozen beside him, her heart racing. No one had ever spoken like that for her before. It felt both terrifying and beautiful. After that meeting, things got even harder. Some workers refused to share tools with Eli. Others mocked him behind his back. But he never stopped greeting Rinla with the same easy smile. They kept working together, even if it meant staying late when everyone else had gone. They shared stories, laughter, and silence that no one else could understand. In the dim light of the engine bay, surrounded by humming machinery, they built something stronger than friendship. A quiet bond of trust between two hearts that the universe had told should never meet. And though the station's walls were filled with judgment and fear, for Rinla and Eli, the small corner of the workshop became something else entirely. It became a place that felt like home. Rinla woke up one morning to a sound she had come to fear. The sharp, metallic chime of an official message. The small display by her bedside glowed red. The words were short but heavy. Effective immediately. Subject Rinla of Valaris is to remain confined to her assigned quarters until further notice. Interaction with crew personnel is temporarily restricted. She stared at the message for a long time, her fur bristling slightly. She didn't need to ask why. She already knew. The whispers, the complaints, the tension. It had finally reached the higher officers. They had given her an order, dressed in polite language but filled with the same old fear. Isolation. She sat on her bed, her hands trembling slightly. Her quarters were small, made of cold gray metal and humming with quiet machinery. There was a single window that looked out at the stars, a few personal items from her home world, and the faint scent of herself that she could never escape. For hours, she just sat there, listening to the silence pressing against her ears. Her people were social creatures. They lived in close families, slept together in dens, and comforted each other through scent and touch. Solitude was something her kind was not made for. By evening, the loneliness was so heavy she could barely breathe. That was when the knock came. A single soft tap on the door. She stood quickly, ears perked. No one was supposed to visit her now. When the door slid open, she saw him, Eli, standing there with a small box in his hands and a stubborn look in his eyes. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered. He grinned faintly. "Yeah, I'm not really good at following stupid orders." She almost smiled, but the ache in her chest was too deep. "They will punish you if they find out." He shrugged. "Let them try." He held out the box. "I brought something for you." Inside the box was a small device, a mechanical bird he'd built out of scrap parts. Its wings were made of thin metal sheets painted silver blue, and when he pressed a button it fluttered weakly and chirped a soft melody. Rinla gasped. "It sings." "Yeah," Eli said, smiling. "Reminded me of what you said about your world. How the trees there hum at night. Thought you could use some company." Her hands shook slightly as she held it. "Eli, why do you keep doing this? You could lose your position, your reputation, everything." He looked at her seriously. "You're not a danger, Rin. You're someone who came here to learn, to share. But instead of welcoming you, they locked you away. That's not right." She lowered her gaze, her tail curling tight. "I thought I could fit in. I thought if I smiled, if I stayed quiet, maybe they would accept me." Eli stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "You shouldn't have to make yourself smaller just to make others comfortable." Those words hit her harder than he realized. She had spent her whole life trying to make herself invisible, covering her scent, lowering her voice, hiding her true self. And here was a human telling her she didn't have to. They sat together on the floor near the window. Beyond the glass, the stars shimmered, distant and silent. The mechanical bird chirped quietly in the corner, filling the room with gentle sound. Rinla finally spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "On Valaris, isolation is a punishment. It means someone has done harm to others, but here I am being punished for existing." Eli's jaw tightened. "Then it's not a punishment, it's injustice." She looked at him, her silver eyes reflecting the faint glow of the stars. "You could still leave, Eli. You don't have to be part of this. You don't owe me anything." He smiled softly. "Maybe not, but I choose to be here, because someone should stand with you, and because—" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because it doesn't feel right anywhere else." The air between them was warm and still. Rinla's scent filled the room, soft and earthy like rain on soil. Eli didn't flinch. Instead, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, smiling faintly. "Smells like home," he murmured. Something inside Rinla broke open then, not with pain but with quiet relief. For the first time since she'd arrived, someone didn't see her as a problem to fix, but as a person worth standing beside. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. Inside that small locked room, two hearts, one human, one alien, beat in quiet defiance against a universe that still didn't understand them. Days passed in uneasy silence after the isolation order. Rinla stayed mostly in her room, spending her time reading old human archives that Eli had shared with her. Stories of Earth, of courage, of people who refused to give up when everything turned against them. She tried to hold on to those stories the way humans held on to hope. But the air on Erebus Prime was growing tense. Systems were showing strange readings, energy spikes that even the engineers couldn't explain. There were murmurs about the reactor cooling system being unstable. Eli worked longer hours, his uniform always stained with grease and worry. Rinla hated not being able to help. She could sense the fear in the corridors through the faint vibrations of footsteps and hurried voices outside her door. Her instincts told her something terrible was coming, and then one night it did. The alarm sirens screamed through the station, a sound of pure terror. The lights flickered red and the floor shook violently beneath her feet. The computer voice echoed cold and calm. Warning. Coolant containment breach on Deck 7. Reactor stability compromised. Rinila's heart pounded. She knew Deck 7. It was the engineering level. Eli was there. Without a second thought, she ran to the door, pressing the control panel. The red warning flashed back at her. Access denied, quarantine active. She slammed her hand against the panel again and again. Open, please, she shouted, but the system didn't respond. Her claws trembled as panic filled her chest. Then, in a sudden burst of fury, she forced her sharp claws into the control panel, ripping the cover open and crossing the wires the way Eli had once shown her in a lesson. Sparks flew and the door hissed open with a groan. She didn't think. She just ran. The air in the corridors was thick with smoke and the sharp, biting scent of burning coolant. She could hear distant coughing, shouts of orders, the frantic steps of people trying to escape. But she didn't stop to help them. Her mind was fixed on one name, Eli. When she reached Deck 7, the sight made her freeze. The metal walls were glowing with heat and gas hissed from a broken pipe, filling the space with a greenish mist. Through the haze, she saw several bodies being carried out by medics. Her heart twisted in fear. Then she saw him, Eli, lying on the floor near the reactor door, coughing violently, his mask cracked open. He was trying to reach the manual shutoff valve, his arm trembling. Eli, she cried, rushing forward. He turned his head weakly, his eyes barely open. Rin, what are you? No. You're not supposed to be here. She ignored him, kneeling beside him and pulling the broken mask from his face. You can't breathe this air, she said, voice shaking. And you can't be exposed, and he coughed, the words breaking off. But the truth was, the toxic gas wasn't hurting her. Her species had evolved in thick mists full of strange particles. Her lungs filtered toxins naturally. The air that was killing the humans barely made her dizzy. She looked at the gas control valve, its wheel glowing red from the heat. She knew if it wasn't turned in time, the reactor would overheat and explode. Without another word, she lifted Eli and dragged him toward a safe corner, wrapping her tail around his waist to keep him steady. Stay here, she said firmly. Then she ran back toward the valve. The metal burned her palms, but she didn't stop. She used her whole weight to turn it. The sound of grinding metal filled the air, and the hiss of gas slowly faded. The red warning lights began to blink slower, calmer. Coolant flow restored. Reactor stabilization in progress. The automated voice spoke, but Rinla barely heard it. Her vision blurred from exhaustion and heat. She stumbled back toward Eli and dropped beside him. He was still breathing, though weakly. She pressed an oxygen mask from a fallen medic to his face and watched his chest rise again. Relief washed through her like sunlight after rain. When the rescue team finally arrived, they froze at the sight before them. Rinla kneeling beside the human, her fur singed, her eyes glowing faintly in the smoky light. Her tail was wrapped protectively around Eli, her body shielding him from the debris that had fallen. Commander Rivek was among them. He hesitated at the doorway, wings trembling. Step away from him, he shouted. But Eli, half-conscious, reached up weakly and grabbed Rivek's sleeve. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried through the silence. She saved me. You should thank her. Then he turned his head toward Rinla, a faint smile forming on his face even through the oxygen mask. You smell like rain again, he whispered before his eyes closed in exhaustion. Rinla held his hand tightly, her heart breaking and healing all at once. Around her, no one dared move or speak. The scent that once brought fear now filled the room like a calm breeze after a storm. And for the first time since she had arrived, no one looked away. Eli woke up 3 days later in the medical bay. The ceiling lights were soft, almost like the sky at dawn. His throat was dry, his muscles weak, and every breath reminded him of the fire and chaos that had nearly ended him. For a long moment he didn't know where he was or if he was still alive. Then he felt something warm near his hand. A gentle touch, careful but steady. He turned his head and saw Rinla sitting beside his bed, her tail coiled near the floor, her ears low. Her fur looked burned in some places, patched with fresh bandages. But her eyes, those strange violet eyes, were full of relief and quiet joy. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice trembling a little. Eli tried to speak, but his throat only made a weak sound. She quickly poured a small cup of water and helped him drink. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her movements were careful and gentle. "Reactor stable?" he croaked after a moment. She smiled faintly. "Stable. You saved them, I just helped." Eli looked at her for a long time. "No," he whispered. "You saved me." For the first time she looked away, her fur fluffing nervously. "I just did what you would have done." There was silence between them for a while, the kind that was heavy but comforting. The medical bay was quiet except for the low hum of machines and the soft breathing of other recovering crew. When the door opened, Commander Revek stepped in. His wings folded neatly, his face unreadable. Behind him, a few officers watched cautiously. Rinla stood immediately, her tail curling around her legs. She was used to that look, the mix of fear and judgment, but this time Revek didn't flinch. He looked at Eli first, then at Rinla. "The Council has been informed of your actions," he said in a low, steady tone. "The containment breach could have destroyed Erebus Prime. You both prevented it." Eli gave a small nod. "Wasn't just me." Revek's gaze softened slightly. "We know." Then he took a slow step closer to Rinla. The other officers seemed uneasy, but they didn't stop him. "You're sent," he said hesitantly. "It used to cause distress among our kind. But during the rescue, something changed. Many of us felt calm around you." Rinla blinked in confusion. "Calm?" "Yes," Revek continued quietly. "Perhaps the chemical balance shifted after the fire. Or perhaps—" He looked at Eli. "Perhaps our fear wasn't chemical at all. Perhaps it was ignorance." The words hit the room like a quiet thunder. Eli smiled faintly, looking up at Rinla. "Told you. They just needed time." She shook her head slowly, unsure how to feel. For so long she had been treated like a threat, a mistake, and now, after nearly dying beside them, they were finally seeing her as something else. When Revek left, Eli motioned weakly for her to come closer. She hesitated, then sat down beside him again. He reached for her hand, smaller than his, with soft fur that brushed gently against his skin. "You know what's funny?" he said softly. "When I first met you, everyone said your scent was dangerous. They said it made them sick. But to me, it felt familiar." Rinla tilted her head. "Familiar how?" He smiled, eyes distant. "It reminded me of Earth, of home after rain. My mother used to keep plants in our old house, ferns, moss, little green things. After a storm, the air would smell like wet soil and life. That's what you smell like," her breath caught. No one had ever described her scent with warmth before. To others, it was alien. To him, it was home. She didn't know what to say, so she just sat there looking at his tired smile. The room seemed to grow warmer, lighter. That evening, word spread across the station. The alien girl saved a human. The story spread faster than the alarms that had once condemned her. Crew members whispered her name not with fear, but with respect. Some even came to see her, tentative, curious, kind. One medic offered her tea. Another thanked her for saving his brother. A small act, a nod, a smile, things she had never received before. And though she didn't show it, Rinla felt her chest ache with quiet happiness. When night fell, Eli drifted to sleep again, and Rinla stayed beside him. She listened to the hum of the machines, the steady rhythm of his breathing. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She didn't feel like a danger. She belonged. And as she rested her head lightly on the edge of his bed, her tail wrapping gently around his arm, she whispered softly into the still air, words he might never hear, but she needed to say, "If I smell like home to you, then maybe you are my home too." Weeks passed after the incident. The station slowly returned to life. But something had changed, not in the systems, not in the walls, but in the hearts of those who lived there. Rinla walked through the corridors now without hearing the sound of doors locking behind her. No one turned away from her anymore. No one whispered in fear. Instead, they nodded, smiled, even greeted her. Some still kept a little distance, unsure, but there was no hate in their eyes anymore, only respect. Everywhere she went, the scent of cleansing air followed her. It was faint now, softer, carrying traces of metal, smoke, and something warm. The humans said it reminded them of forests and rain. Even the other species aboard had begun to get used to it. It wasn't strange anymore. It was simply her. Eli was recovering well. His burns had healed and the color was returning to his face. But the experience had changed him too. He spent more time near Rinla now, talking, laughing, teaching her about Earth. He even started helping her grow small plants in the hydroponic bay. One day, they stood side by side in front of the little garden she'd made. A cluster of green vines grew under the soft lights, their leaves wet with mist. Rinla bent down to touch the soil, her claws careful not to harm the roots. "I like this place," she said softly. "It smells alive," Eli smiled. "That's what Earth smells like after rain." "You'd love it." She tilted her head curiously. "You always say that after rain." "Why does it matter?" He looked at her, his eyes full of a faraway memory. "Because after the rain everything feels new. The world breathes again. The air carries life. It's when you know the storm is over." Rinla looked around at the plants, the small green life growing where there had been only cold metal before, and she realized maybe this was her after rain. A message arrived later that day. The Galactic Council had made a decision. Rinla's species would no longer be restricted. The research ban had been lifted. She was officially recognized as a member of the Erebus Prime crew. Eli found her sitting in her quarters, holding the message with shaking hands. Her ears twitched as he entered, her eyes bright and wet. "They accepted me," she whispered. "I'm one of you now," he smiled gently. "You always were." She let out a shaky laugh, covering her face. "Eli, you don't understand. My kind never thought anyone would see us as more than a mistake. Our scent, it kept us alone. We lived apart, even from our own allies. But now," she looked up, eyes shimmering, "now they say my scent makes them calm. Peaceful." He walked closer and sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. "That's because peace smells like home," he said softly. There was silence for a long moment. The station lights outside dimmed, simulating night. The stars outside the window glimmered like distant candles. "Do you ever miss Earth?" she asked quietly. "Every day," he admitted. "But sometimes, when you're near, it doesn't feel so far away." Her heart fluttered, and she didn't know why. Her tail brushed lightly against his arm. "Then maybe," she whispered, "I can bring a piece of home with me. Wherever you go." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You already have." Outside, the storm-worn planet below Erebus Prime glowed faintly in the dark, clouds swirling like gentle waves. Inside, a human and an alien sat side by side, breathing the same air, their scents blending in quiet harmony. For centuries, species across the galaxy had feared what they didn't understand. But on that small station, 2 lives proved that understanding could begin with something as simple as a breath. Later that night, Rinla left a small note on Eli's desk before he woke. It was written in her careful, elegant handwriting, slightly uneven but full of feeling. "Humans say home is a place, but you taught me home can be a person. Thank you for seeing me when everyone looked away." When Eli found it, he smiled through quiet tears. He looked around the small garden she had made, the soft green leaves, the faint scent of wet earth, and he whispered into the still air, "You smell like home, Rin." And though she wasn't there to hear it, somewhere deep in the ship, Rinla paused in her steps, her ears twitching. She smiled, eyes closed, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely free. The scent that once brought fear now brought peace. And in that peace, a new chapter of humanity and kindness had begun.